30,000 feet above the sky kind of introduction to podcasts, and you know how the entire thing works. So we'll be doing an introduction to podcasting as a career. What are the different technical aspects that are involved in podcasting? What are the different obstacles that you'll need to overcome? How to build a community, the future of podcasting, and some of the technical aspects. The Q&A will be as part of the session after Gabriel's session. So I'll request you all to hang on till then. So what is a podcast? How is it different from radio? How is it? What are all these things and these questions, different questions that we have, and how do we answer these questions, right? That's what we will be covering today. So a podcast is nothing but radio on the internet, right? A podcast is an audio file that you can upload to the internet for everyone to listen to. The reason a podcast is different from a song, or the reason it's different from radio in general, is that podcasting is 100% online. You can't listen to it on the radio unless someone comes up with an innovative radio station where they're making podcasts available. The second thing is you can distribute it over the internet. So what that means is that you can upload your audio file or recording to a dedicated platform, which is typically called a hosting provider. And this hosting provider will then be able to run you through how you can distribute your podcast. And after the hosting provider has uploaded, or after you have uploaded your podcast to your hosting provider, it will be distributed to various podcasting platforms like Stitcher, iTunes, Castbox, you name it. There are like some 15, 20 different podcasting platforms. We'll talk about it. How is it different from other mediums? The reason podcasts are different than other mediums is that the first thing is that it is a passive way to consume content. If you're watching a video, if you're listening, if you're reading to something, you always need to have your 100% of your attention there. There is no other thing that you can do apart from watching that video or something else. But the beauty of audio is that it is a passive consumption media, right? It's passive consumption media. And what this essentially means is that you can listen to a podcast when you're working out, when you're walking, when you're trying to sleep, when you're running, whatever it may be. But you can continue engaging in that specific activity and also continue absorbing that knowledge. Why start a podcast? You can start a podcast because you need to look at something. Okay, we've already covered what is a podcast, and this is already done. So why start a podcast? The reason that you need to start a podcast is because you want to showcase your expertise in your field. You want someone else's story to come out and be shared with the rest of the world. That's one of the reasons that I started my podcast, where I interview people who follow their passion. And the only reason that my podcast started was because I had met so many amazing people, and I realized the impact that these people were having on my life. And which is why I thought, hey, you know what? I really, really need to make sure that I am able to showcase the stories of the people I meet with the rest of the world. And which is why I started my podcast, because I thought it is just an interesting story to tell. It is also a wonderful way for you to build networks. People who you would not normally talk to will give you an opportunity to meet them, spend time with them, and also just talk to them in case that you tell them that, hey, I'm doing a podcast. And the reason for this is because everyone loves feeling important. Everyone loves talking about themselves. And so what that means is that we can always make sure that everyone is given access to the specific people who are doing a podcast because they want to feel important and they want to come and talk about their story. Now, it is also a great opportunity to follow different interests and to find out more about the world. But the thing that stands out to me about a podcast is that anyone can do it. You don't believe me? You don't believe me that anyone can start a podcast? Let me tell you about a 13-year-old girl named Arushi who runs a podcast called When I Was 13. During this podcast, she interviews people from different walks of life and tries to take people back for how their life was when she was 13. So it is simple that a lot of people can do it. But the challenge with podcasting is not who all can do it. The challenge with podcasting is how many of you can continue doing it and how many of you can continue doing it on a consistent basis. So consistency and quality is the key, not whether who is it can start. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, and if you're thinking about, you know, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, there are a million thoughts or a million ideas that you will have in your head. So over the next 1 minute, over exactly the next 1 minute, I'd like you all to just think about the following aspects that you'll need to keep in mind for your podcast. What is the title of your show? What is your show about? On it, you will hear, and you should listen if you are. Why would someone listen to your podcast? Who would listen to your podcast? And revisit this as you move along. I want you all to think about who your target listener is for the content that you are creating. If you all have access to the chat, if you already are running podcasts, maybe you can answer these questions and you can put it out in the chat for all of us to know. After the meeting is over, we will share the details of the people who have listened in. We'll have a podcast that's out for this entire piece, and so that you can also come and you can revisit who are all the different people that were part of this conversation. I can start by saying the title of my podcast is The Passion People Podcast. My show is about people who follow their passion, and you should listen if you are someone who is interested in taking inspiration from other people. The people who are the people, or who is my target listener? My target listener is typically an Indian between the age of 18 to 35 years of age who's just grown up and who's looking to do something exciting or different with their life. So I'll just give everyone just maybe a minute or two to answer these specific questions for your podcast so that you can think about these specific questions and fine tune this as you move along. In addition to this, the next session of this introduction to podcasts will be done by one of the other co-organizers, Saif, from the Musafir Stories. So we'll just take another minute so everyone can answer these specific questions, and then we will move on to the rest of the show. Yeah, Saif, on to you.
Okay, thank you, Naga, and a very good afternoon to all of you who've logged in, dialed in on this Saturday afternoon. I will try to keep it short and sweet. Naga gave you a very good introduction, a very good opening into what a podcast is and how you can start even thinking about creating your own podcast, right? It's not very difficult, but answering some basic questions right at the beginning, it'll go a long way. So once you've done this, please do share your responses through the chat if you're willing to, and we'll have that shared with the wider group as well. Um, uh, Moving on to the next session, Naga, if you can help me out with the slides, please. Yeah, let's keep moving. Yeah, probably this is a good place to stop and start thinking about some of the other aspects of it, right? Like Naga mentioned at the beginning, there is a few important things that you might want to think about early on in the podcast because it becomes harder as you move along the journey excuse me of putting out episodes out there. So one of the earlier things, even though it's not as difficult to change this, is coming up with the format of the show. How do you want the show to be? Is it going to be an interview where you bring other people on? Do you have the capacity to do that in terms of having a, say, a recording setup, or if you want to do it remotely, is it possible while maintaining the standard of quality of the audio, etc.? So some of those are the questions to consider. Next, another format is a monologue, which is basically you just doing the talking. Again, compared to an interview, it might sound a little easier because you don't have dependencies on others, but be aware of the fact that you're doing the whole thing yourself. So coming up with a script to making sure a monologue doesn't become monotonous, right? It's very easy. So kind of figuring all of those out is very important. And again, do you need a co-host to partner you? It's sometimes the chemistry between you and the co-host needs to be really strong to carry the show if you can't do it by yourself. So things like that. Other formats that we have seen is things like a roundtable discussion, uh, again, a very narrative based documentary type podcast, audio fiction, and all of these. And as you move through the different levels of podcasting, like say audio fiction, or even creating something like a documentary, the level of difficulty or the work involved, effort involved also becomes difficult. So all of those things are something worthy to be considered at the beginning of the podcast itself, beginning of launching the podcast itself. The other things are duration of the show, right? Do you want to keep it short, like say short fixes, under 10-minute podcast to, or do you want to do something that's freewheeling and goes on for a longer while? Do you have the capacity to put that out consistently? So all of those things are something to be considered. Now, there is no silver bullet in terms of what works best. Like people always ask, like, what's the ideal duration of the show, right? um, the only answer, and sorry if I'm kind of not giving a straight answer to that, is the show length of the show needs to be as long as it needs to be. Basically, you can't really try to like kind of put in too much in there. At the same time, you can't, just because you don't have an upper limit, nobody's putting an upper limit on the show. It's not that you can speak the whole while, right? As long as your show adds value, that's how long it should be it 20 minutes or be it 1 hour. So there are shows that do extremely well under 20 minutes. They're under 20 minutes and they do extremely well. At the same time, there are shows that run beyond the hour, and one of some of the top crossing shows like Joe Rogan Experience, for example, or even looking at the Indian scene, Amit Verma's Seen and the Unseen. So things like that. And again, frequency. Are you doing it weekly, fortnightly, monthly? Is that frequency right for you? Is it right for the audience? So things like that, keep in mind. Name of the show also, this is obviously something you can't change very easily once you've begun. So give it some thought. Let it reflect the identity of you, identity of the podcast, like what kind of a brand you want the podcast to be. And at the same time, make sure you're not quite repeating it, because it's easy to find if you keep it very generic, it might be already out there. So you don't want that confusion while you're sharing it with the listeners. So things like that, keep it in mind, and go through a few iterations of that and share it with your close circle of friends, advisors, whoever it is. And after enough feedback, I think you're good to make a decision. Naga, can we jump on to the next one, please? So all of these are, again, something to work on at the beginning, but obviously, even once you've put in the work, all the hard work at the beginning, you can always kind of improve as you move on. But be aware that sometimes things like the cover art for the show, not for the episode, those can kind of be whatever you stick with for a while, right? So just put in some thought into that, as well as um, branding. Like, do you have like a tagline to go with your podcast? And things like that. And if you want to take it up another level, coming up with a little trailer of sorts and stuff like that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so to come up with, just in a nutshell, right, what you need for coming up for that whole package of an episode, I can kind of break it up into three parts. One is the opening sequence of the intro. Then there's the actual content of the show, which is you and the guest, or just you or whoever doing the talking. And then there'll be the end of the show, which is the outro. So where the things you might want to consider for the intro is, do you need any royalty-free music? Where can you get those sources for royalty-free music? Are there any free sources available? So we've listed a few on the screen, but beyond that, be sure, even if you're getting royalty-free music, it might not always be free in terms of cost, right? You might have to pay something for royalty-free music as well. So things like that, consider all of that. Um, that's to consider during for the intro, right? If you want to add music in there, as well as during the podcast itself, if you want to have a background score and stuff like that, something to keep in mind. Once you have all of this stuff, once you have the episode, which is an MP3 file usually, the next question would be, what would where would this reside, right? Because it's not, unfortunately, with podcasting, it's not as straightforward as with YouTube, where you just upload it in one place. Depending on the host, it might be several different options. Like listed, Libsyn is one. It was considered the industry standard until a few years ago, but now there's a lot of new players that have come into the fray, with Anchor being one of the latest entrants, right? So think about that, compare them, and see what suits you and your requirements. And finally, once you have chosen a podcast host, that's where you would be uploading your MP3 file or an episode file, right? And that's how an RSS feed gets generated, which is then put out to the listeners to basically subscribe, right, through one of the podcast players. So that's usually the flow. Like, once you start working on a file, on a bit of audio, you come up with a file, and once you have that file, finally you put it up on a hosting platform, and from there an RSS feed is generated and distributed to different platforms like iTunes or Google Podcasts. Next slide, please. So here are some more details for someone who is kind of looking at more, say, if you want to break up a podcast episode into, say, different sections or different things to consider. Again, it might not always apply if you're just doing, say, a simple interview-based podcast. So all of this might not, but at some level, you might want to be touching at these to maintain a logical flow. But again, I just want to reiterate that the podcasting gives you that freedom to kind of experiment and do it as you like. So that way you don't necessarily have to stick to all of these guidelines. But for someone looking at some sort of a order, these are some good guidelines to go by. Yeah. And yeah, next slide, Naga. So we've been talking about a lot about what platforms do people listen to. It is it has always been, and it is still one of the problems that the podcasting medium itself is quite fragmented. There's a number of different places where you can listen to a podcast too, so it's not always easy. But with the entry of say the players like Google Podcasts, it's become a little more easier. You can now say Google it and you'll get the link to my podcast or whatever. Back in the day, you had to depend on, oh, do you have an iPhone or do you have an Android phone? If you have an Android phone, you can listen to it on 5 different apps, 6 different apps. So it was a little bit of a problem, the fragmentation of the medium. But slowly we are getting to a point where it's becoming more and more mainstream. The problem remains at the root, but at least by big players coming on board, it's become a little more easier now to explain to people how one can listen to. So we've just listed a few here, but this is not kind of comprehensive in any way. It's just few examples. Next slide, please. What are some mistakes that people make while starting out as newbie, right? When you're starting out just creating the podcast. Again, it goes back to the point of kind of seeing it, or while you're deciding on what is the podcast you want to make. One good practice is to define the persona of a listener, right? Who is your listener? So after you've done that, you'll have a fair idea as to who you're targeting, and then the next step, obviously, once you start putting out content, will be to kind of interact with those listeners, right? So always make sure whatever little engagement it is you're getting in the early days, be sure to be very prompt in responding to that and engaging with the listeners, kind of getting feedback from them, and completing that loop by having that feedback. Again, you can't do it for every one of them, but if you see trends, obviously it makes sense to focus on that and improve on that. Spending too much money at the beginning, the entry barrier, the barrier to entry in podcasting is very low, so you don't have to spend much. Even if somebody says that you have to spend quite a bit on money, quite a bit on equipment and stuff like that, don't always go by it. Make sure you have the core structure, the core framework for the podcast in place, and you can slowly upgrade. You don't have to put down money right at the beginning. So things like that. We've listed a bunch of other things too. Consistency is one thing that I always kind of stick by. Then making sure your podcast is available on all the possible platforms that are out there. Again, that problem is becoming easier now to solve, but make sure you try and address as many platforms as possible. And then little things like collaborating with others, or making sure you look at market trends and stuff like that, are something you can do to keep up with the podcasting industry, as well as what is kind of in the trend, right? So those are the things. Next slide, please. So, I mean, again, this is going to be the last section of the podcast. I know I'm pretty close to end of time, but I'll quickly run through it. Podcasting as a career, right? So not a lot of people think of podcasting that way, at least in India, but it will, and eventually it'll be there. Something to consider is, first, at least this is how I started off. I started making the podcast for myself. So start off that way and slowly kind of expand your horizons to look beyond that. But if you are, see, if you want to be serious of podcasts or podcasting as a career right from the get-go, it is definitely possible. Just see what you can do, where the gap is, and try to focus on that area. If there is a compelling story that you have to tell and you want to do it like full-time or close to full-time or whatever it is, definitely go for it. There's a number of benefits that podcasting has, and it's catching up in India. So there is definitely room for that. People usually start it off as a side hustle, and they start off as something that is uh, kind of supplementing their existing, say, if you're a blogger or if you're a YouTuber and things like that, you might also want to repurpose that content and build on a podcast. But again, podcast has its own USP, so it doesn't always have to be that way. So consider it from that perspective, right? Can I say, use it as a tool for just branding, right? It's consider it as a modern day um, business card, for example, if you want to pursue it that way. So things like that, if you can consider, it's definitely worth giving it a try. There there's not too many people who are doing it as a full-time career right now. Most of them who are doing it in the capacity of, say, not a podcast in itself, but to build it as a brand around the other offerings they're kind of doing. So they use podcasts to disseminate that information and that brand. So a lot of different examples to continue. Possibility is there, but if you ask me from my perspective, baby steps first. Start considering just you as the audience, and you can slowly move on from there. I think that's about it from the 101 of podcasts, or an introduction to podcasts. Basically, again, this is not comprehensive, and I don't think half an hour anybody could do justice to this, but we're always there to take any questions even after this event. If you're building out a podcast, we're there to help you out. O2 Pod Collective was started with that aim to kind of help people or come together as new podcasters and share people get through challenges that we faced, right? So we're happy to help you out in that way. Details will be email. You have our details on email, and obviously we will be sending out the details of the presentation as well to the participants, to the listeners. Yeah, stay in touch. I like to wish all of you all the best in your journey on starting off the podcast, and the control over back to Naga.
Thanks, F, for a wonderful insight into what we need to do and how to start a podcast. For the next section of the podcaster track, we have Gabriel from Hindenburg, who will be talking us through the different aspects of audio editing using Hindenburg. Hindenburg is also providing us a 90-day free trial for all the participants of this seminar, and we will share the link that you can use to redeem that. They typically have like a 30-day trial, but now they're giving a 90-day trial. And I'll pass this along to Gabriel for the next session. On to you, Gabriel.
Okay, all right. Hello, everyone, and thanks to be present this morning here. It's morning in Paris. So, well, I'm really happy to be there because some of you know that I've been contracting the COVID-19, and now I'm completely good to be there. So, really happy to be with you today. Well. Today I'm gonna talk to you about a beautiful piece of software. First of all, I will introduce myself. I'm Gabriel Fadabi. I'm a sound engineer and radio producer. I've been making radio for more than 15 years now. I worked at Radio France, where I work today. Europe 1 and RFI, which are big national radios here in France. And I'm a podcast producer for more than 4 years. I make children's stories. We made a very big production on the life of Pope Francisco this month. A podcast, a fictional podcast, and other. So I don't have my own podcast, but I participate in lots of podcasts here. And I'm a Hindenburg user since 2010. Hindenburg is the software I'm going to talk about today. So Hindenburg is a software which at the first was a community radio project. So it had to be simple, it had to be reliable and affordable, and designed for radio. So for those of you who use softwares for making audio and making podcasts, you may know that lots of softwares are able to do everything. But doing everything comes with lots of things and tools that you don't really need. And if you're not a really technical person, if you're not a sound engineer, uh, in front of a software which presents 500 tools in front of you, you can feel lost, and you, even if you do things on the software, you cannot concentrate on the storytelling, and that's the main issue when you start doing podcasts. And at the beginning, so the software started in 2008, and it was for radio journalists and rural reporters. So people who are not technical at all, and who want to make ready to broadcast products. So today, Hindenburg has lots of products. We have the small, the basic product, which is called Hindenburg Journalist, which is for independent creators. When you begin the podcasting, it can be a very good product for you. We also have the big brother of that one, which is called Journalist Pro, which is for professional journalists, and we will see later. We have lots of tools which give you the possibility of making a very beautiful product without the knowledge of technique. We also have the ABC product, which is for audiobook producers. We have a field recorder version of the software, which is on iOS and makes your iPhone transforms your iPhone into a field recorder, so it records in PCM, linear, non-compressed audio, and you can make little editing on the product and send your sound if you're a journalist, for example, to your radio. We also have other products like a broadcaster educator for specific needs. So the main possibilities of the software are like lots of other products. One of the qualities is it's cross-platform. So when you work on Mac or Windows, you can transfer your work on the other platform and continue your work. It works as a non-destructive editing software. So when you cut the audio, nothing is destroyed. So we can go back and redo things, and you never touch your rushes. It does multi-track recording and playback, of course, and it auto updates. So when you install it and when you're on the internet, the software updates itself. So the bugs are usually very rapidly corrected, and the software follows. And you have the very interesting one-click podcast publishing. We will see that at the end of the presentation. So these are the main possibilities, but you can also go beyond. Well, you have essential tools you have in your hands: editing, compression for better levels. We will see that later also. Don't worry, I'm just giving you the list, and later we will see these points. You have fades, you have equalizer, you have the possibility of you adding plugins. So for those of you who know what plugins are, these are effects you can add to the software, so you can use your own plugins and standard plugins. And we also have the loudness normalization, which is very important today, because when you give a product, when it's a regular product, if you diffuse it to the when you broadcast it, I'm sorry, to radio stations, it has to be normalized, and not the normalization with peaks. You have to normalize it with loudness analysis. So the software does that, and it's very interesting because when you give your sound to YouTube, to um, other platforms, they sometimes they have some rules about normalization. And going beyond, with the software, we have a clipboard system, which is very interesting. We will see that later. We have a noise reduction in the pro version. Auto level, very important. A voice profiler, we will see that a little later. And the time stretch. The software is compatible with lots of main standards. So when you make your editing, if you're an independent and you have to work with a sound engineer, for example, you can export your work in AES-31, for example, AAF, which is the exchange format for Pro Tools. Hindenburg can open Pro Tools session also. So if you work with a sound engineer, you can open the session. You can add your editing part and give it back to the sound engineer for the mixing part. It works with all of the main formats. We do WAVE, which is the non-compressed PCM audio. We also work with lots of other formats. Also MP2, which is the format for broadcasting. For this conference, we give you an extended trial special discount, and you can have it on the address on the URL, which is on the screen. So if you go to this address, hindenburg.com -Bangalore, you have a trial version of the software for 60 days. You have 30 days, basic 30 days, so you will have 60 days to try it. Every possibilities are unlocked, so you can use it. You can see if it's good for you. So this is for the introduction. I will now start to show you the real possibilities of the software. So I'm seeing a question here. What is the advantage over Audacity? Well, this is a very interesting question. That's why, well, we will have a question answer at the end of the presentation. But well, the first thing you have to know if you see the software. So I will switch to the software here. Well, this is the presentation of the main window. So you have a multi-track system, and it's very simply presented. So you have a few tools here. On the right, you have the clipboard, and on the left, you have the name of the tracks, their level, some tools to mute, to make it solo, etc. And that's all. That's very simple. You have very simple presentation. So we will see the audio settings. Well, this is the main part of an audio software. You go to tools, options. You have to give your input and output to the software. So if you have a podcasting microphone like myself, you see I have this. So this is a USB podcasting microphone. It is called Yeti. It's a blue. So blue is the manufacturer. So you give Yeti as the input. The playback it goes to Voicemeter. It's a software which gives me the possibility of having to mix the computer sound with my microphone is for this session. So you give your microphone here as an input, and that's all. So you can start to record your voice, and that's where the podcasting begins. So I'm now recording. I can specify it again, and my voice is recorded, and that's all. And so I'm here. Well, this is the recording possibility. So you can give other inputs to the software. So here you can, if you have two microphones, you can give first microphone here, second microphone there, and do interviews. So you will have one track there per microphone. Well, when you import audio here, you can do the drag and drop. So if you have a sound somewhere, you take it, you drag and drop it to the software, and it comes automatically here. You can also go to File, Import, and find a sound somewhere and import it. So I have some sounds here on my desktop. Hindenburg here. Yeah. So I talked to you about the auto level. You see that when I have a level which is not loud enough, the software analyzes the sound and changes its level. So if I do it manually, I can do Control L, and it does the same thing, and it did it for my recording also. So one of the very interesting functions in this software is the possibility of having auto levels all the time. So if I do a bit of recording here with a softer voice, you see it has to be louder. And if I do another recording here with a very loud sound here, you see the software makes it even automatically. So it will gives you the possibility of concentrating on what you're saying, on the storytelling. You don't have to lose time for making these little adjustments during your session. So for the audio importing, you can do it with MP3, MP2, AIFF, well, all of the main formats. So usually in a traditional software, we don't have the names on the tracks here. When you open Hindenburg the first time, you have four tracks which are named. So this one is for your voice, this one is for interviews, this one is for audio effects, and this is for music. So it's a kind of template. You can change it if you want. So if you want to change the name of the track, you can call it voice. And it is very important to work that way because, as you know, in podcasting, the voice is the main thing in podcast. Everything is follows the voice. It's the voice that carries the rest. So it's very important to have this kind of um, organization when you put your voice here. So when you have music, you put your music in another track. So I'm gonna search for the music here in my. So I'm gonna import music. So I have my music here. Let's begin. So well, here I have my music. Here I have my voice. And if I have interviews, I will put them in this track. So if I do some settings, some modifications on one track, I will not. It will not have effect on other tracks. So if I want to remove the music just to listen to the voice, I can mute this track. Listening begins. So I'm now recording. I can, for example. So that's the interest of it. For those who have who are used to these kind of softwares, you can add tracks, of course. So the number of tracks are unlimited. So you can add another track for sound effects here. And you also have the master track. The master track is your main mix. So everything will go to the master track. So if you have an effect on the master track, it will affect the whole project. So we have a playhead, like lots of music. Editing softwares. So the playhead is here. So when you put your playhead somewhere, it will start to with play the sound here. You also have regions.
Gabriel, I think you have to
Yes.
change the screen. It's still on the presentation. We can't see the Hindenburg cursor.
I'm sorry. So this is the playhead. This is the playhead. So you can put it where you want. And something that is very interesting in Hindenburg. So you asked me about its difference, and one of the main advantages of Hindenburg is that lots of things can be done only by your keyboard, and working on keyboard is really important. If you are used to keyboard, if you're a journalist, if you're used to write things down, you know that when you leave your keyboard and you take the mouse and you go back to your keyboard, it will give you lots of distraction moments, which are not good. So one of the very important things is that in Hindenburg there are few keyboard shortcuts, and they are completely optimized to be under your hand. So the very important one, which I'm going to show you, is the three letters J, K, and L. So if you if I click on L here, it will read the sound, it will play the sound normally. If you do J, it will play backwards, so it will be very easy for me to scrub, to go through my project. And if I do it in combination with the K key, it will go faster. So it's very interesting when I do fast scrubbing. And I also have here the vary speed, which gives me the possibility of going 2 times faster, for example. And if I go 2 times faster, and when I'm de-rushing, when I'm hearing a rush and I'm trying to find the parts that I want to keep. So yeah, so I'm now recording and specify again, and my voice is recorded. It's very, very interesting to have this possibility with a software voice. It changes the speed, not the pitch. So it's very interesting for your ears. You can easily understand what is said. Another thing on the keyboard is the tab touch, the tab key, which moves the playhead very rapidly to the important parts of my editing. So we can do it with combination with Shift. You see, and it goes really fast. You don't have it in lots of softwares. Yeah, so you can go there with a very loud. See, it's very interesting. Another thing is all of these clips are non-destructive. So, for example, if I move it, the main sound has not been modified. If I change its duration, you see, I have a region on the right and on the left where I can change the duration with a software. And if I change it, you see the original sound is always here, software voice. So I can also copy this one, and in the copied version, I also have the original sound. So this is something very, very interesting, because when you do your rough cut, when you start your editing on this kind of stuff, well, for a let's say a podcast, you don't try to finish the editing. You will not start from the cleaning part. You won't start to clean the ahs, or the hesitations and this kind of stuff. You will first hear the main the totality of what you have recorded, and you will try to find what you will keep and what you will not keep. So you will do a very rough cut, and then when it's done, you will have an idea of the whole timing, and then you will clean. So basically what you will do is you will make some rough cuts. This one, I don't want it. I will do this. And then when I'm finished, I can go back, do all the cleanings here.
Layered guitars. The layered guitars, drums, keyboard. Music mixes the layered drums, keyboards, even sitars.
And yeah, well, I think it it's a very good beginning for this introduction to the basic tools. So in the basic editing, you have to highlight a region. And you can do all the stuff I've shown you. So there are three interesting regions on a clip. You have the superior part here, where you can change the level. Once again, if the level is not good, you can do Control L, and the software auto-analyze the level, so the level is going back to normal. You have this part that I show you for the timing of the region, and you have also this part which does fading. So fading is not okay for a voice, of course. It is interesting for music. So if I change the level of the music after the speaking stops.
Even sitars.
Here we can make fades, and you can change the fades. You can change the place of the fade.
Mixes the layered drums, keyboards,
And you can also change its duration.
drums, keyboards, even sitars.
All right, so if you want to record one track, so you give a track name to your track, you select your input. So on the Pro version, you can have multiple inputs. So you can, for example, on an interview podcast with 3 different microphones, have 3 different microphones and record them. If you have the journalist version, you can only have 1 track of recording. So if you have a show with 1 voice, it can be interesting. So when you arm a track, it is oh, I'm sorry, it's going too fast. I have a problem with my presentation. Sorry. So if you have 2 tracks that are armed, you see, so we can have 2 tracks. Now I cannot do it because I have 2 times the same input. So I can put another input here and arm it. So here I can record multiple tracks. And the auto level does the rest. I'm trying to go back to my presentation, but it has a little. Okay, so this was for the recording. So you also have the possibility of record phone with a software like Skype. So for those who know that Soundflower was a bit of software which gave the possibility of having a virtual input on the computer in order to record, for example, a Zoom session or Skype session. Soundflower is not a product anymore. It doesn't work with computers, but Hindenburg has its own version of Soundflower. So if you're a Mac user, we give you a free version of Soundflower that you can use to record your Skype, so you can have phone calls recorded. If you have, if you're a PC user, if you're a Windows user, you can use a free software which is called Voicemeeter. Voicemeeter gives the possibility of what I'm doing right now. So I have a virtual input on my computer, so I can use the sound from Zoom and record it directly inside my software. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the organization of your sounds. So this is an answer also to what is the difference between Hindenburg and other softwares. In lots of softwares, you have to put your sounds here on the main track here, and do an organization which gives you a headache at the end of the day, because you will have your main editing part here. You will have sounds that you don't want. You will move them here. You don't want to lose them, so you don't know where to put them. And some people have sometimes this very bad habit of putting the sound they don't want at the end of the timeline. You put it here at 37 minutes. At the end of the day, you are okay with this part of your editing. It's okay. You will have a little, well, it's very small. It's a podcast of 2 minutes. So you want to export this. And you export that, and you will have a file of 37 minutes because you have put some audio here. And it will give you a 37 minutes sound. You don't know why it happened. You have to come back here, find the sound you don't want. You have to select them. You have to suppress them, etc., etc. So in Hindenburg, we have the clipboard here. The clipboard is a place you can put your stuff, your audio. It can be multi-track audio. So, for example, I will. I'm sorry, I didn't switch to the right. So you can see this clipboard on the right. You see clipboard. It have multiple families, so you can name yourself your families. So my voices here, put my musics here. So I have a music, and it works also with drag and drop. So you drag and drop your sound. It will come here automatically, and you can copy something on your timeline. It can be multiple regions, multiple clips. So you copy it and you paste it here. So, and you can rename it. So this one is edited. This one is my brush. And this is the music. So you can rename it. Once again, it's non-destructive. So when you do this, you will keep the original sound. You can hear the sound you put on the clipboard here.
Ackerman says the band's music.
And you can put them back. So when you put this on the clipboard, you don't need it anymore on your timeline. So you can remove it and have a very clean timeline for working only on what is going to be broadcasted or exported. So you want this part, just have to drag and drop it here. And that's done. And you can even do this with a whole I will select this part, I will copy it and put it in my clipboard. And this part is in the clipboard, so I can use it. So you can make templates. So having all the time for every episode, your music, the voice, the beginning voice, if you have jingles, etc. You can put them all together and put them in the clipboard. And every time you make your episode, you just have to drag them. You have to drag them on your timeline and do the rest. Um, et voila. And that's very interesting. And the clipboard is really interesting. And believe me, when I do large shows, when I do lots of shows, and when I do a show with 24 episodes every week, um, it's really interesting to have a place where you put your sound. And it's not just one sound, it's an assemblage. It's more than one sound. So that's very interesting. So when you organize your things this way, you can concentrate on the rest. So this I can make a group also of this. So the letter G on the keyboard will group this part, so they will move together. So I won't lose the sync between the speak and the music. So you can see in the presentation the exact same thing. So for the organization, that's about all. For the levels, I have a little extra for the levels. So if you start to take care of your levels, when you put some speak here on the music will be too high level. Listening again. So
Ackerman says the band's music mixes the layered.
You see, the music is too high. So the volume is too high. So I have to change the volume of the music under the speak.
Ackerman says the band's music mixes the.
So usually in a traditional software, you have to put level audio level points and change them. We have a completely different philosophy here in Hindenburg. We have the in-out markers. So when you click on the letter I here, it puts the input, the output here at the end. So I have the green and the red points. And here I can just do this with the level. So it makes what we call a ducking. So the ducking will change the level of the music only under the speak.
Ackerman says the band's music mixes the layered.
So it's a little too rough, so I can change it a little bit.
Ackerman says the band's music mixes the layered.
And that's very easily done. And for those of you who do this already on your podcast, you know that it's a very time-consuming part of your work. So you can really easily and very fast do this on multiple parts of your show. And once again, the storytelling is the most important. You don't have to lose time for record multiple tracks. Okay, so that's for the levels and automation. So we also have uh, the new. So it's a very exclusive well, it's a beta version of something we are working on, which is called Magic Levels. So you will see it in next versions of the software. So we already have it on beta version. You can use it. So when you choose all the parts of your mixing, you have this tool which is called Magic Levels. When you do it, it will analyze everything. It will find all the speaks. It will put them on the right level and do the docking on every part where there are speak over music. So that's practically done. So I just had to do just tools, magic levels, and it's done. My mixing is done. Listening begins. So I'm now recording. I can with a software with a you see. So doing this.
I think you have to change your slide again. Sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's okay. So I'm gonna go back and do the magic levels. So I will just select this, tools, magic levels, and it's done. I have all my speaks which are at the right level, and you can even see that the software analyzes the part where there are no speak, and it will put the level down. And the docking has been done automatically on all the music. So it is this new.
Ackerman says the band's music mixes the layered.
And you can change it as you wish. But you will have a gain of time, and you will, if you're not a sound engineer, this kind of things will give you a very fast production workflow. So I'm gonna talk about the well, all the ethics and all the plugins you can put on your tracks. So for each track, you can add some plugins which are included with the software. So Hindenburg gives you a very simple equalizer, a compressor, a loudness meter to see where are your levels, a very interesting module which is called noise reduction, and the BBC meter. Well, it's not for everyone, the BBC meter, but the equalizer is very interesting because it has only 3 knobs. So you have low, mid, and high. So with a very loud. So you just have to change the knob a little bit. Sound here with a very loud sound here. A very loud sound here. A very simple equalizer, very effective. We also have a compressor. So a compressor is for making even levels on the same track. So if you have a voice here and you have to have the voice loud all the time in order to be understood, you will have this problem with all your interviews. When you have an interview, the levels will change. So you just put some compressor here. Listening begins. So recording, I can specify it again, and my voice is recorded with a software. So the voice is even all the time. The level is even. If I put all of these parts here on the same track,
Ackerman says the band's music mixes the layered
very loud sound.
guitars.
You can see that all the levels have been changed to the same. So you have less dynamic, and you have the voice, which is on the first plan of on the first in front of your mixing. Very interesting. And you also have the noise reduction. So for the noise reduction, I will give you the demonstration I have here. So when you have a noisy sound, so the noise, the continuous noises are really very difficult to remove. You have hums, you have buzz, you have a sound that has been recorded too low, and putting it up, you will have lots of noises. So in this example,
On the site, you're presented with one frame from the video. You
see, we are hearing a hiss, which is one of the noises very difficult to remove, if not impossible. So if we put the noise reduction module here, it will analyze the sound. So I have
one frame of fame.
I have to wait a little.
On the site, you're presented with one frame from the video. You mimic the pose in the frame, take a shot with your webcam, and then upload the picture. More than 30,000 people have done it so far. The result is a frenetic mix of motion and stop action
Here, I removed the hiss.
together. On the site, you're presented with one frame from the video. You mimic the pose in the frame, take a shot with your webcam, and then upload the picture.
So it's non-destructive, and it can be really a life-saving thing for your podcast, because you don't always do it in a good studio, and when you record interviews, you can have this kind of noises.
Sure.
And I guess you're hearing my computer here, which is very, very noisy. I can do the same. So I will make a new session, put my here. So I'm recording a bit, and I give time for the noise to be recorded with my sound. A bit. So I will just let you hear the result. Here, so I'm recording a bit, and I give time for the noise here. So I'm recording a bit, and I give time for the noise. You see, that does a very good job of noise reduction. So you can use it nearly all the time if you have bad conditions of recording. Okay, I'm gonna go a little faster. We're arriving at the end of the presentation. So we have the exporting phase, which is well, very easy. I'm gonna show you this, for instance. So I will I have this session,
Childhood favorites, Public Enemy, with guitars, drums.
And I want to export it. So I just have to do this, file export, and it gives me the possibility of export the format I want. I can do WAV file. So this is the main format. I also can export a AIF, audio interchange file for working with other sound engineers. I can do FLAC, which is very interesting, and Opus also is here. And when I do this, here, save. And it's done. I have my WAV file, which is exported. But when you do podcasting, you can also have multiple platforms where you want to export your work. And if you do it by hand, it will be very time consuming. So we included the publishing possibility here in the software. You can edit all the metadata here. So if you, I don't know if you can see it because I think there's no. Well, I think I will share my screen. It will be easier. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So when you have the publishing possibility, you can do edit and put all the metadata in your product, in your podcast. So there will be a title, there will be author. You will have all the tags that are used in the platforms. So you will put them one time. You don't have to do it for every platform. So you will give all the informations of your episode, and then you can add pipes. So these are, I call them pipes. These are targets. These are places when you can put your final product. So you can do MP3 podcasts. You can put a SoundCloud. You can put a version on your computer. So we have all of these that can work together. So if you put a copy on your computer, for example, where in my documents folder here, and you can put another one to upload your file via FTP, and you give your FTP server information. And when you do that, you just go one time, you publish what you have clicked here, you publish. So you can do lots of them in one click operation. That's about all for the publishing. I will answer to your questions afterwards. We have also a time stretch possibility here. So I have to.
Ackerman says the
Here, for instance, we have a speak which is too much.
Keyboards, even sitars.
And if you want to correct this, you have to, well, do some cuttings or change the place where music enters. But we cannot do that because it's. I don't have a lot of time here in music.
Ackerman says the band's.
So we added the time stretch possibility here. So it is here a keyboard shortcut, Control and Alt.
Popular with his childhood favorites, Public Enemy, with guitars, drums, keyboards, even sitars.
And it works very, very fast and non-destructive also. So you can put a time stretch and remove it if you want. And that's about all you, well, there are lots of other possibilities in the software, but my time is done. So we will answer to your questions. Thanks for your attention, and I hope you will go to the URL I gave you to have your trial version.
Thanks, Gabriel. It's a really insightful session, and all we can now start taking questions for Gabriel, Saif, and myself. So I think Gabriel, one of the questions that had come was, can't we publish directly to Simplecast?
To Simplecast.
Yes.
Well, we don't have it here, but we have a very responsive team of developers. So if it's a demand, there's a page when we can do it, and Simplecast will be included if it's a need. We can do it very fast.
Okay. Puneet, so I guess that answers your question.
There was another question, Naga, about using a laptop mic for recording. Not quite related to the editing, but you might want to take that as well.
If you want to use a laptop for recording?
Yeah, one of the questions was if I can use the laptop mic for recording.
You can do that. You can do that, but you will have the quality of your microphone. So usually laptop microphones will have lots of problems. They are optimized for everyday talking and Skype and this kind of stuff. So they will have lots of noises. They will you will have a lack of low end. So the voices will be like a little, nosy. So it's not really a very good solution. But you can use your laptop with this kind of microphones. There are lots of very cheap microphones of this kind. You can use, and the sound is quite good.
Yeah, I'd agree. And Vaibhav, just to your point, the laptop mic should be like your last option if you have nothing else. I would say even a cell phone mic is much better, but a laptop mic, a lot of static, and even the noises that the fan noises or whatever, everything gets picked up as noise. So you should avoid using the laptop mic.
But it's a very generic question. So there are thousands of laptops. So maybe one laptop will have the ideal microphone, and the other another one won't. So it's very hard to answer to that question.
Okay. The other question that we had got was from Preeti. They were asking, is there a place where we can get a quick tour of the features or the tools before we subscribe?
Before so the subscription is a free, it's totally free. So you won't be charged of anything. But if you want to see all the possibilities, you can also go to the website, the Hindenburg website. We have lots of tutorials online in English. All the things I explained here and lots of others are explained. So you have also step-by-step tutorials when we show you all the possibilities, all you can do. So go to our website. It's a good one.
Okay. And I think the other question was from Karan Veer. He was asking, can we use an XLR mic for recording? So I think he's using an XLR mic and he's converting it to a USB and then connecting it to his computer, but there was some issue with the levels.
When you have XLR input, so they are not in XLR on the computer itself. So you have to use a sound card between your microphone and your computer.
Okay. I think the other question is from Puneet, who is asking, can we record and edit right out of iPad Pro? This is for for the mobile app, I think, the Hindenburg mobile app.
Well, the mobile app is optimized for the iPhone. There is no version of iPad, so it would be my one of my frustrations also because I have an iPad and I would love to work on my iPad, and one of my fantasies is to have a good editing solution on iPad. Uh, for the moment, we don't have it, but who knows? Maybe in near future, hopefully.
Okay. So Puneet, I hope that answers your question. The next question, Gabriel, is from Pragya, who's asking, what is the name of the mic that you're using, and any suggestions for mics for beginners to use?
Well, I'm not here to do publicity for one specific microphone. This one is one of my favorites. You know, Blue is the company which makes them, Blue, and this is called Yeti. Yeti. So Yeti is the podcasting microphone. So you just put it on the USB input of your computer. It has also an output for my headphones. So it's very practical. So I just use this, and that's all. I have microphone and my headphone, which are supported here. So Yeti is good. The Rode makes another one which is called Podcaster, which is a beautiful piece of microphone. You also have Apogee, which makes a podcasting microphone. Usually they are around $150 price, and so you have cheaper. You have well, that's the budget, and it is really a very interesting solution for podcast.
Okay, all right. And then the next question is, can this software be used both offline and online? This is from Sham.
What can be? I didn't get what can be used.
They're asking whether you need to be connected to the internet to be able to use the Hindenburg software.
No. It's fine. It's installed on your computer.
Okay, great. So the next question was on cost-effective mic from Keshavan, but you've already answered that. Blue Yeti is what you mentioned.
Yes.
And I'll also share the links for the YouTube tutorials from Hindenburg so people can use that. The next question is, why is a headphone recommended while recording a podcast? What purpose does it serve? This is from Amitabh.
Yeah, well, it is one thing that is not recommended for for the people who is being interviewed, but for yourself, a podcast maker, a sound recorder, has to have the headphone. There are multiple reasons. The main reason is to be concentrated on what is being recorded. That's very important. When I don't have my headphone, I will hear other things in the room. And if I hear them, I will be distracted by them. If they're not recorded, I would have been distracted with things that are not interesting. And if there is something bad happening in the sound, they can be buzz, they can be cracks, cracklings and stuff. If you don't have your headphone, you won't hear them. You won't hear them. And afterwards, when the person leaves, you will hear your rushes, and you will be crying a lot. And you also have another problem. It's the difference of levels. You are used to do your podcast. You do it every day. So you will talk very good in front of your microphone, everything is okay. But when you interview somebody who is not used to be interviewed, to talk to a microphone, they will speak very low. They won't be good um, in front of a microphone. So if you have your headphone, you will hear that. You will hear that, and you can correct that. You can tell the person to get closer to microphone. If you don't have your headphones, you can do all of this.
All right, that's fantastic. So the next question is from Keshavan, who's asking, does the podcast require the voice to be flat, or will it disrupt the flow during the conversation? I think he's asking about loudness. How do you do loudness when multiple people are involved and background noises are involved?
Well, that's a tough one. The voice has to be flat. Well, if you're talking about the well, the term flat is for EQ. Uh, it's for equalization. But if you're hearing flat in loudness terms, it's really important to have the same level all the time. Very important, because people will hear to the podcast in their car. They will hear the podcast with well, very cheap kind of headphones and headsets. So if you don't have a good sound, a flat sound, or a even sound, people will have to change their levels all the time on their computer, on their telephone, etc. So that will give them, well, maybe inconscient, but they won't love your product. They won't be, they won't concentrate on what you're saying. The technical part will get in the way. You see what I mean?
Yep, understood. Okay. The next question is again from Amitabh. He's asking, is there any specific headphones that you need, or can you use any headphones to connect to your mic when you're recording a podcast?
There are two types of headphones. Well, there are more than two types of headphones, but there are two types: the open ones and the closed ones. So the open ones, which are not these ones, I don't have open headphones here, but these are headphones you use for hi-fi listening. You see, they sell those for even gaming and stuff. They are open. They don't have these cushions here. So when you do use those ones, you're very let's say you're not you don't exclude outside noise. So you will hear outside noise inside in your ears, and you won't discriminate. You don't know if it's noise which is being recorded, or is it a noise coming from outside. So when you're doing interviews, open headphones can be very good, because when you ask question, some radio anchors also do this. So they will have a direct contact with the person they are interviewing. But when you're doing just recording, editing, mixing, it's better to have closed headphones like this. So I won't hear outside noise, and I will be concentrated on the sound.
Fantastic. I think that's really helpful. That's something new for all of us. Not really thought of it the way that you explained to us. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
All right, folks. In case you have any other questions, you can continue to drop it in on the chat. Gabriel, any other inputs or tips that you can share for people who are recently started podcasting?
Well, when you start podcasting, you will be drowned with information on technicity and drowned with other informations too, because there are thousands of websites which talk about podcasts. So if I have one real tip is try to concentrate on the storytelling, on what you try to say. Technique hasn't uh, it doesn't have to be on your way. So uh, write things down, do interesting things on your podcasting. We hear a lot of podcasts where people just talk as if they were in their room, and that can be interesting for geeks podcast. You see what I mean? Where you have to explain all the new geeky stuff. And, but if you want to engage your auditory, you have to have good technique and concentrate on what you're saying. So having good technique, we try to help with Hindenburg. We try to give you a very simple tool which gives you the possibility of concentrate on the main subject, which is your storytelling. For the rest, well, good luck. Make beautiful podcasts.
Thank you. I think now we have some more questions coming in. So
Yes.
how do you the next one is, how do you do remote interviews, and any specific apps or softwares that you can recommend? I think this is from Pragya and Amitabh. A bunch of folks are asking this question.
Yes. When you have, let's say, Skype, for example, you have an input and an output, uh, which are set in the software. So the input is your microphone. So this microphone is my input. The output will be where you will hear sound from the person you're talking with. So that output can be put on a headphone. It can be put on the speaker phones of your computer. So what we want to do is to put that sound to our software. And we cannot do it natively with a computer. We have to put a piece of software between the computer, Skype, and Hindenburg, for example. So that piece of software is called a virtual input. And in the Macintosh world, there was a beautiful software which was called Soundflower. It was totally free, and it worked fine. But now Apple has changed the way of managing the sound. It doesn't work anymore. So we developed at Hindenburg a version of Soundflower that we can send to you, that gives that possibility of having the virtual input between the output of Skype and the input of your recording software, Hindenburg. In the PC world, it's much easier. So I will share with you if I find my Zoom. Okay, so I will share with you Voicemeeter. Can you see it?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
You see what you so Voicemeter, it's a software. It's totally free. So I'm really a fan of it for years. So here you can take for example your input, your microphone. So your software comes here in the virtual inputs. So if you put the sound of your computer here, you can mix them. And when you mix them here, you can put them. So I will change the screen to Hindenburg. So here in the input section, you can put voice meter output. So your um, your virtual input on the other software goes directly to Hindenburg input. So when I record here, I can record my microphone, which goes to voice meter. I also can play some music on my computer. For example, we'll go to YouTube just for the demonstration and play a sound.
Writing's not that easy, but
You hear that?
Yeah.
Grammarly can help. This sentence
Oh, this
is
is a
grammatically
focus.
correct.
But it goes
But it's
also
wordy
inside
and
my
hard to read.
Hindenburg.
It undermines the writer's message, and the word choice is bland. Grammarly's cutting-edge technology
You see? So I have this virtual piece of software which takes the sound from one or multiple sources. It can be the microphone, it can be Skype, it can be Zoom, whatever you want, and put them as a virtual input in a software. And you have the monitoring part also, so I can hear what I'm recording and I can do the recording virtually.
Fantastic. I think the question that Karanveer was asking around voice meter was how do you decide which version of voice meter?
Well, there are lots of versions of voice meter. Banana is the easiest.
Okay.
So, because Banana has two hardware inputs, so you can put two microphones and mix them. You have two virtual inputs. That's enough for starting.
Got it. Karanveer, I hope that answers your question.
Also,
One of the
Naga,
other questions was from Keshavan. If you aren't so good at scripting, how do you approach scripting when you're interviewing for a compelling topic or a complex topic? So how do you do scripting for a complicated topic?
When I'm interviewing somebody,
Yes.
well, I never script. I do my research on the person, on the subject. I put my mindset inside the subject. That's the main thing I do. Second, I will put on a paper the main topics I have to discuss with a person, not the question. I will not put my questions in a piece of paper. I just put all the topics I want to discuss about. And third of all, it's a secret of making good interviews. It's to listen to the person while you're interviewing. If you're reading your script, you won't have a good interview. The interview will go bad because you won't listen to the other person. A good interview is like a good conversation. And a good conversation is when you listen to the other person. So you just do the research on the subject. You read a lot about it. You go online. You find all the information. You put the topics, only the topics, and then you go with the flow. That's a good interview.
yeah, I think that's great advice, Gabriel. And For other people who are looking at a professional workshop to learn a little more of scripting, we have Chavi, who runs Sonologue, Sonologue. She runs workshops that cover scripting as well. So look it up, or actually we can share a link when we send out the notes. That's one thing. And I also saw a lot of questions come in around doing remote interviews, right? There's a couple of options other than the ones Gabriel mentioned. There is Zencastr, Zencastr. This offers some free as well as paid options to do remote interviews where the tracks get recorded locally on your guest's computer as well as your computer. And there's also Squadcast, which is pretty good too. It has good reviews. It's a paid software though, so you can check both out. I'm sure for the Squadcast there is a trial version, so you can try it out before paying for it. So those are a couple other options. And if you still want to go lower than that, Skype has recently come up with default recorder. So basically when you're interviewing somebody on Skype, it records something in the background. But again, the drawback of that is that it's all on one track, so you can't really edit it a lot after, and the quality is also pretty average. So go for Zencastr and Squadcast before considering Skype is my advice. Okay, Naga, were there more questions?
The other part that was mentioned by Amar was that there's also Ringer and Clean Feed, and that Zencastr is offering free unlimited remote interviews until the end of June. So there's no limit on the number of guests, which is typically there on the hobbyist plan. But just a quick reminder that Zencastr is having some technical issues due to the load. So please check that before you use it. I had some issues with Zencastr today afternoon as well, so I ended up switching. So you can do that. The other question, I think the last question we'll take will be from Pragya, who's asking, what is the software that you can use that is not complicated and easy to use? So Pragya, the answer is that that's the reason that we're showing you Hindenburg. You can click on the link and try the 90-day trial. You will note that the other softwares typically have a lot of editing options, or you have too many features that makes it overwhelming for you. So which is why we were suggesting Hindenburg, but Audacity is a great tool as well.
But for for my part, well, there will never be a good advice from other people when you're used to make sound. So in 1 year, in 2 years, when you will be used to do your editing, you will see that we can do everything with every tools. So I can do a podcast with Audacity. I can do a podcast with Pro Tools. Well, the question is, where can I be as good as possible? Where can I concentrate on my storytelling? So go that way. If you do the trial on Hindenburg, if you try the Audacity, Audition, there are lots of other DAWs, other softwares. But I don't know lots of them that are optimized for what we do. You see, because Audition is good for people who will make better sound on video. That's also the case for Pro Tools. It's for sound on image. You use a DAW like Cubase or Logic Pro. There are excellent softwares, but they are optimized for music. So that's the question you have to ask yourself. Where am I good enough to concentrate on my storytelling?
Fantastic. Thanks, Gabriel. That's a very, very insightful session, and thank you for being so patient and for sharing your insights with not only with Hindenburg, but all your experiences with radio as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you
It
so
was
much.
really a great pleasure for me. Thanks for everything, your nice messages. I was reading them, and thanks again for the opportunity you gave me to be with you today. And have a nice day, and the rest of shows will be great. I'm sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gabriel.
And thank you so much, Gabriel. I know you've been through the virus in the past days and recovered, and you've come right back and given this wonderful session. So thank you and stay safe.
Thank you. So I'm recovered now, so I'm good.
Great.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Gabriel. All right, folks. We have a couple of people who are joining in now, and that means that we're about to start the podcast, the podcaster track, which is going to be up shortly. Again, for people who have just joined in, this is the first ever edition of the virtual podcast conclave, which is organized by O2 Pod Collective, which is run by Saif from the Musafir Stories, me, Naga from the Passion People podcast, Vishnu and Shankar from the Writer and Geek Show, and this specific Zoom session, and we get a lot of support from Shiv, who runs the Software People Stories podcast, and this is his Zoom session that we're all using. So immensely thankful to him and his entire team for allowing us to do this. In terms of a background for O2 Pod, we've been doing this over the last couple of years in Bangalore only. And the most recent, we try to do it quarterly, and the meetup for March got cancelled due to COVID-19. So we ended up doing a virtual event, and this is what it is. And I'm happy to know that a lot of people that we work with, and a lot of other podcasters that we deeply respect and work with in the